next speaker is Ron Dupree. Dupree. They made a movie about it.
I don't think so.
Dupree?
Not yet.
So Rob sets out a strategic analysis and assessment of the full spectrum of insurance claims arising in catastrophic natural disasters at the national level. So please join me in welcoming Rob today.
$37.9 billion. $37.9 billion is the number that my industry, the insurance industry, paid out in claims in 2021. These are claims from car crashes, severe weather, business and commercial liabilities, and other damages. But today I'm going to focus on the severe weather portion. So in the agenda, we'll talk a little bit about Insurance Bureau of Canada, or IBC, who we are and what we do and why I'm here. Talk about severe weather trends, residential property insurance risks, factors affecting insurance, and also a little bit about our natural catastrophe advocacy. So who are we? Who is Insurance Bureau of Canada? We're the National Association for Canada's private home, auto, and business insurers across the country. So all the insurance company names that you can think of, all the big names are all members of Insurance Bureau of Canada. We're not the regulator. We don't regulate the industry, that's government's role. But we work very closely with government. Aaron's team and in the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo, I was in Fort McMurray during the wildfire. I arrived at the first week of May when the fires were still raging, and we were working with that community to try to understand what the issues were and how we could help, because we knew this was going to be a huge insurable event. And really our role is to work with governments and advocate to make sure that insurance remains available and also affordable for all Canadians. When we think about severe weather, over this last year, some of you may have heard some new weather terms that you haven't come across before. King tide, derecho, and there's also a bomb cyclone in the eastern part of the country. In 2021, we heard earlier about the atmospheric river event. These aren't terms that we normally speak of, but these terms have all happened in our country in the last few years. So in insurance terms, a catastrophic event is a single severe weather event that causes $30 million or more in insured damages. We track those and report on them separately as catastrophic or NatCat, natural catastrophe events. So this chart, you can see the red line. We see an upward trend. We started formally tracking these in 1983. We can see in the 80s, my industry was paying just over $400 million on average annually for severe weather damages across the country. In the early 2000s, it was about $675 million that my industry was paying out on average annually. And this past decade, we're now over $2 billion on average for severe weather. And in fact, last year, my industry spent over $3.1 billion in just severe weather events to homes, vehicles, and businesses. So it's a fairly alarming trend. So the frequency of these events has also been increasing as well. All these numbers that I'm sharing with you have all been updated for inflation, brought up to current values so that we're comparing apples to apples. But we can see in the 80s, we had 20 catastrophe events, and 7 of those were water related. And each decade since then, it's gone up and gone up and gone up. And this past decade, we have 111 catastrophic events, with 35 of those being water related. So this is pretty significant. Not only severity, but frequency of these events are happening as well. So 2022, I mentioned some of the terms of the king tide, derecho, and also the bomb cyclone, but there's also all kinds of tornadoes and wind events that we had in Alberta and across the prairies. There was also Hurricane Fiona, which was the largest severe weather event that has ever impacted Atlantic Canada. So this was a pretty major event. And these events combined were over $3.1 billion in severe weather. And that's just the insured losses. We know that many of these communities, people don't have insurance on their homes, their businesses, or their vehicles. If we think back to the atmospheric river, even though there was around 800 million in insured damages, things like the public infrastructure, the highways, the bridges, not typically insured. So these aren't counted in that number. So the costs are substantially. The top 10 natural catastrophes for insured damages in our nation's history are listed. Previous speaker, Aaron, just spoke about Fort McMurray wildfire in 2016. That was the costliest insured event at over $4 billion. Number 3 and 4 also happened in this province in Alberta. They were the flood and also a hail event in 2020. But as we can see, there's also other areas. There's Quebec, there's Ontario, there's Atlantic Canada, there's British Columbia. So there's all these events. What's interesting is if you look closely at the years of these events, 8 out of these top 10 costliest events have happened since 2013. So in the last 10 years, we're seeing the vast majority of the costliest events. So catastrophic losses, and here in Alberta, I've got graphics and images of fires, floods, wind, and hail. We've experienced them all, and my background is claims adjusting. So I was an adjuster for over 30 years, and I've been involved in virtually every event that was listed in the previous slide. And with some of these, last year we had Canada's largest hailstorm that impacted on Highway 2 between Red Deer and Calgary. I was on Highway 2 at the time, just happened to be in another event. I mentioned I was in the Fort McMurray wildfire. I was on the ground in Calgary when the floods hit in 2013. We were actually vacationing in Canmore at the time. Came to Calgary, I thought, oh, Calgary, safer? Not so much. I've been in windstorms. I have literally been blown off my feet in some of the windstorms in Alberta, and also been involved in events across the country. What's also interesting is in the past 10 years, 5 of the costliest severe weather events have impacted Western Canada, over $8 billion. Alberta seems to be the hotspot for severe weather. We've had all types of severe weather, and it's also happened in all the different areas across this province. But we're not alone. We're seeing a lot happening in Ontario, a lot more in BC, the floods and wildfires and king tides, winter storms, and now Atlantic Canada is really starting to be impacted very significantly. So residential property insurance risks. This is all fine, but people think, what about my house? How is this impacting me with severe weather? Well, there's a lot of things that are happening in the world right now. As you can imagine, one of the big things is inflation. And with your home insurance, you've likely had long-term stability and availability. You want insurance for your home. You have dozens of providers, not only in Alberta, but across the country, that are willing and want to provide you with coverage. And the premiums have been fairly stable over the last 20 years or so. We are starting to see some of these costs go up, and there's some of the pressures that are here. We've got a lot of pressures, including inflation and global macroeconomic conditions like interest rates. When interest rates are high, you might think, oh, the insurance companies are making lots of money because of their investments. It actually has the opposite effect. Most of the investments that the insurance industry has are in government bonds, and that's legislated. So when the interest rates go up, the bond price goes down. So high interest rates actually mean lower investment income in the industry. And we also see supply chain issues. And if anyone has built anything out of wood in the last couple of years, you know that the price of lumber was really, really high And if you've had any damage, like in 2020, 2021, even in 2022, we're seeing some supply chain issues. There's just some materials or some colors that are just not readily available. We saw this in Calgary's hailstorm that happened. Some people just couldn't get a specific color of siding. Manufacturers couldn't get their raw materials because of the pandemic, and some of this has continued on. An insurance policy, when you have damage from an insured event, it replaces the material or rebuilds your property with similar kind and quality. So if you had vinyl siding, it'll put back vinyl siding. There are some endorsements now that actually allow you to upgrade to more resilient features. So think of a property that's damaged by a wildfire. You could now have fire resistant siding. A hailstorm, you could have impact resistant roofing material. After the 2020 hail event in Calgary and the surrounding area, the costliest hail event, we worked with the city of Calgary and they actually introduced a program. As we go back too far, there we go. They introduced a program to, if a person was going to replace their roof and they didn't have this endorsement, they would just get a regular asphalt shingle roof. If they wanted to upgrade to an impact resistant roof, the city of Calgary had a program that they would pay up to $3,000 for that upgrade. Wildly successful. They had more people apply than they had enough funding for. And that's just an example of a municipality working with the insurance industry to build more resilience. In Alberta, the insurance industry modifies the weather. Did you know this? For over 25 years, the insurance industry has been funded. The Alberta Severe Weather Management Society that actually seeds hail clouds as they're forming. So what this does is it injects and sprays a specific non-toxic chemical into these forming clouds. And what that's trying to do is to force the hail to fall sooner. It doesn't eliminate the hail damage, but it makes the hailstones smaller. As you can imagine, smaller hailstones mean less damaging, less severity. So the industry has been 100% funding this initiative for the last 25 years. And there actually is a Weather Modification Act. So there's legislation on modifying. So there's a whole bunch of factors that are impacting insurance. And these are some of the emerging issues that I touched on. And inflation is the biggest one. Last summer, in Canada, we saw the highest inflation percentage that we've seen in 40 years. You see it when you go to the grocery stores, when you're buying any goods, even the price of fuel, everything is going up significantly. We see supply chain issues and some of these higher costs really translate with your home. So think of your home. The cost to replace your home today is significantly more than it was 2 years ago. Your home insurance premiums are based in part on the replacement value of your home. So if these materials are going up, the value of the rebuild of your home is going up, your insurance premiums are likely following suit. So this has impacts not only to you as a property owner or vehicle owner, but also to the insurance industry with the claims costs. So with claims costs going up, that affects the amount of money that insurance companies have to underwrite all these other risks. Now, there's a whole bunch of things they do with global reinsurers, make sure that there's enough money in the event of a big event. I remember in Fort McMurray with the wildfire, we figured the damages were probably going to be somewhere around $3 or $4 billion of damages. And I remember a number of residents quite concerned. I need to make sure I get my claim and get paid right away because I think the insurance industry is going to go bankrupt because this is such a big event. I smiled a bit and I said, annually, the insurance industry pays over $11 billion in taxes and levies to provincial and federal governments. And on top of that, they have reinsurance, which is global reinsurers that are insuring risks around the world. So insurance companies have insurance for these big catastrophic events. So it wasn't an issue for anyone, and there was no insurance companies or anyone that had any financial or serious financial implications with that event. So the bottom line, the gray dotted line, is the consumer price index. We can see over the last couple of years that's gone up, which is inflation. The blue line is mortgage and home insurance inflation. So since 2019, a couple little spikes, but again, fairly flat. The red line, that's the residential construction costs. And we can see right around 2021 and early 2022, we saw a really big spike, and that's where the peak of anyone building a house or buying any type of materials was seeing significant increases. Quite a bit higher than some of the other areas of inflation. So what are we doing about it as an insurance industry? We try to manipulate the weather, and we're somewhat successful, but that's regionally specific. What else can be done? Well, we're part of a coalition called Climate Proof Canada. So Climate Proof Canada is made up of insurance industry representatives, also with disaster relief organizations, municipalities, and also non-government organizations and think tanks, where collectively we're coming together to find out what can we do and what can we be working with governments on to help reduce some of these risks and ultimately to build a more resilient country. We recognize that the insurance industry has a role to play. We need to make sure that we're offering the right products to people to protect these assets, their homes, their businesses, their vehicles. But government has a role to play to help reduce the systemic risk. Aaron was talking about some of the berms that they're doing up in Fort McMurray to protect against some of these ice jam flooding that can be happening. And also residents and stakeholders. If people are aware of what their risks are, they're more inclined to do something about it and reduce their risk. So it's really sharing information. We have a national action plan on flood, where the first step is just education, making people aware of the flood risk and trying to get comprehensive flood maps that everyone across Canada has access to. The same level of information. Our next speaker is going to talk about some of the artificial intelligence and some of the flood mapping tools that are available. But as a homeowner, you may not know your flood risk, fire risk, or hail risk unless it's happened to you. Relocation and protection. Aaron's municipality is choosing protection to build up these berms. Fort Vermilion in Alberta, they also had flooding damage in 2020. They're actually relocating a number of properties from that flood hazard area to a less risky area. So that's relocation. And then just amended land use planning. Going forward, it just doesn't make sense to let people build in flood hazard areas. It just does not make sense to put people in homes. So we're working with the federal government on a national flood insurance program. My industry is prepared to insure over 90% of all Canadians for flooding. But realistically, that covers 0% of the highest risk individuals, because those at highest risk, and even the ones that were in BC, there's one particular community in BC in Abbotsford. That community is called the Lake Water. How do you think they got their name? This community in the Sumas Prairie a century ago was a lake. They drained the lake, and they have been continuously draining it for the last 100 years. Very fertile soil, so this community of lake water was literally the lowest point of this lake. When you have a big atmospheric river event that pushes all this rainfall and overflows all these rivers, the infrastructure they had to keep this lake from forming again couldn't keep up. And lo and behold, you have significant water damage. This is a high-risk area. We know that. Very difficult or very costly, if not impossible, to get flood insurance for this community. We're working with the federal government to develop a program to make that available. We're getting closer every step of the way. We also work with an organization called the CSA Group. You may have seen the CSA, Canadian Standards Association, that used to be called, on maybe a lamp or your TV or some other electronic little CSA sticker. They also do voluntary codes, standards, and guidelines for a number of things for communities and for individuals. I put this particular one here, the National Guide for Wildland Urban Interface Fires, because if you remember Lytton, BC, June 30th, 2021, that community was literally, that village was wiped out because of fire. Virtually every building burnt down. A lot of challenges in that area, and I'm dealing with that community. We're finally at the final stages of debris removal, but council has recently approved a new fire resistant rebuilding bylaw, so that every building is going to have to be built fire resistant following this national guide. So a very good step for wildfire resilience in this community in the future. So that's great news. By now, all of you are insurance experts, right? If anyone has questions, we can send them over to you. If you don't think you're an expert, we have a phone number and an email of where you can call where we do have experts. We have a consumer information center and a number of offices across the country. I lead that national group, and we answer over 10,000 inquiries every year from people with general insurance questions. Some people are academics looking for statistics, others want specific details on some of the different codes, standards, and many other factors. But this phone number and this email address, if you have questions or anyone in your community has a general insurance question, I'm not expecting you to know everything, but based on today, I'm expecting you to know who to tell them to. We're here to help you. We're here to answer questions. And with that, I thank you, and we'll be able to answer any of your questions that you may have.
Always helps to turn it on. Thanks for the excellent presentation. Just one question. One of your earlier charts where you had the bar charts, descending order, that was multiple years, wasn't it?
So the frequency, severity were the top 10. Which one?
Okay. What I'm looking for is I guess the top 10 is dollar based, I believe, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Okay, was that adjusted for dollar value to reflect current dollar value?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So we're bringing everything up to current
Level
value
playing field.
to compare apples to apples.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, they all have it. Yeah.
So I'm sure a lot of people are mitigating their risk and buying more insurance. How's business? Are you getting more and more clients, more and more revenue coming in, even though your payouts are huge? Is business going up for you because people are scared and they want to have more coverage?
We're seeing a population growth, so that just naturally grows how many people need insurance. We're also seeing today more coverages available than there was. Think back to the Halifax explosion back in the First World War, the largest man-made explosion in the Halifax harbor. At that time, fire insurance was the only insurance coverage that was available. Many people, because of this explosion, had explosion damage, windows blowing out, other types of shrapnel and debris. That was not covered by insurance. Fast forward to today. We have sewer backup, overland flood. We have cyber terrorism insurance coverage that protects us against state-backed, potentially Russian hackers going into our system. The coverages are expanding more and more. We also have something new that's called parametric insurance. So think of the coral reef that's in front of the Riviera Maya down in Mexico. This reef is actually a natural protection against erosion and the waves that are coming in. The hotels along that corridor, they have a pretty big vested interest in making sure that their hotels don't wash away in a hurricane. So they want to make sure this reef stays there. What typically happens is after a big event, you need to do the work to protect the reef, and that takes time getting governments set up. So this group organized what's called parametric insurance. So once it reaches a certain threshold of a certain category of storm, payments are made automatically to that entity so they can start that, whatever it is, that repair work or debris removal, whatever that is. So it's something new and innovative that we're seeing all the time. So direct written premiums, total amount of premiums has been increasing very steadily. We see different lines of business having different areas. In Alberta, we've got a rate freeze for auto insurance right now, so government is just looking at it, says we need to help control some of these costs, although that doesn't fix the problem. You know, kind of like severe weather, you can cap how much your home insurance is going to be, but then who's going to pay for all this damage? There has to be that pot of money to fix the problem, which is not an easy solution. It's a long-term challenge that we all have worked on.
Thank you.